I wish we could go in and start, but we'll wait
I
till
did
10
that.
o'clock.
When I was in high school, I
We're
read my
on.
card. My dad didn't even.
We're on. So you're on.
Oh, okay.
We're live.
We're 5 minutes early, though, so we don't need to go. Good morning, everyone, but since it's just 9:55, I really want to wait until 10 o'clock, just in case any other board members arrive. Bravo. Okay, good morning. We're going to go on and get started. I'm so happy to see all of you here this morning. We have 6 board members here, and we can conquer the world with 6 board members. So thank you for getting up earlier and coming this morning. Mr. Feliciano, I can make a few remarks, and the superintendent before we begin with Dr. May.
Yes, ma'am, and then you can review the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, well, let's go over that first. Is there someone who will approve the agenda this morning?
I move that we approve the agenda as printed.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay. We need the approval of minutes from July 25th, 2023. That seems eons ago, but is there someone who will approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes with any necessary corrections.
Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. I'm very excited to be the chair of the Equity Committee, and I always like to start by reminding everyone about the difference between equality and equity, because out in the real world, you hear that interchanged a lot. And I think we can agree that equality is where everything and everyone is treated the same. That's equality. However, equity is people being treated by what they need, individually what they need. That's the difference between the two. And I'd like to always keep that at the forefront of our minds when we're talking about this. And I want everyone to understand how dangerous inequities are. Inequities hamper economic growth, such as whether you're able to buy a home or not, whether you're able to pay your taxes. Inequities hamper your access to technology or not. And some of the indicators of inequity are housing insecurity, food insecurity, violence, high poverty schools because they're in high poverty neighborhoods, per pupil spending, is it equitable or is it inequitable? Because if it's based on what you need to thrive. We have some fourth graders who cannot provide information from a text. If they read a text, they're not able to inform anyone about what it is they have read. And we have eighth graders who don't understand proportion. Now, is that from inequity? Do we have a rigorous curriculum at all of our schools? So the experience that a child gets at one school is the same experience in terms of rigor and richness that they'll get at another school. All of these things go back to the idea of whether we have inequities or whether we are proficient at making sure all of our students get exactly what they need. Now, some things on the positive side that show equity: well-maintained buildings. We have well-maintained buildings all over this district. That's positive for all of our students. We have abundant early childhood experiences all over our district. Now, what we have to find out are those early childhood experiences all positive for the children there, and do we get the results that we need from there? So before I ask the superintendent for remarks and we get started, Dr. May, I just want to, this is from, and I hope our secretaries can get this for everybody, Real Savannah, seeing Savannah through a racial equity lens. This would be very productive for all of our staff and board members and superintendent to have. But one of the things it says about us as the Savannah Public Schools, they take students completing high school or college credit courses, AP, IB, or dual enrollment from the 2020 to 2021 school year. Our multiracial students, 28% of them made this goal. Our Asian students, 40%. Our Hispanic students, 19%. Our white students, 35%. Our black students, 13%. So what can we as a board do to improve those figures. So having said that, again, I welcome everybody, and I'm so happy that we have this opportunity, because there are plenty of places in America where discussions of equity are frowned upon. So the fact that we have the chance to make sure that all of our schools have vigorous and rigorous curriculums means that we're ahead of the game as far as I'm concerned. So Dr. Watts, if you'd like to make a few remarks, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Feliciano.
Thank you. I share your excitement about the discussion today and the reports that people have in front of them. This is an opportunity to dive deeper into 6 or 7 of our schools that have been labeled as CSI or TSI schools, which means students in these schools have been underserved educationally. And as you've just heard, it's our responsibility as a board and as a entity to ensure that these students have readiness for college career. These, a lot of these performance metrics give us insight into the readiness that our students have. And I hope today's discussion will inform next steps. Questions asked today will give us all something to think about as we pursue Together We Can in advancing our schools forward. So with that said, Mr. Feliciano will join us at the front to give us a breakdown of these reports.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So today, for the Sub-Equity Committee, we will be reviewing 6 federally designated schools using the Chevron report that was created by the Board Accountability Committee. Dr. May will be going to the podium to present the information.
Good morning. I appreciate being able to address the 6 schools that received federal designation, either as CSI schools, the Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools. There are 4 schools with such designation: A.B. Williams Elementary, Brock Elementary, Duren Middle School, and Mercer Middle School. As well as the TSI schools, we had 2 that received the Targeted Support and Improvement designation. Those were Largo Tibet Elementary and Windsor Forest Elementary. And I do think it's important for the community as well as all board members to understand the process that was undertaken that was more unique in this particular round of designations, because these designations, although they are 2023 designations, they in fact are based on our CCRPI, the College and Career Ready Performance Index data from school year 2022. These designations, in fact, came out in December of 2022, and the criteria, because of the pandemic-related impact on CCRPI and the indicators that were available, they had to modify their process of identification. So I want to walk you through how the CSI schools were in fact identified. But the larger picture is that the Board Accountability Committee, Equity Subcommittee, has always looked to address those areas where most significant impact can be made. As such, the reason that we are covering the CSI and TSI schools today is because those designations indicate these are schools where additional supports are needed. And to really bring this home and really address what is happening at each of these schools, at our next meeting, the October 24th meeting, we will invite 3 of our schools and their principals to come and talk to you about the challenges, the successes, their strategies to continue to improve their schools. And those 3 selected schools that will be forthcoming at the next meeting are A.B. Williams Elementary, so we will have Dr. Tony Foy. Mercer Middle School, we will have Dr. Christian Panton with us. And lastly, Windsor Forest Elementary, so we'll have Dr. Janai Gilbert Collins to represent those schools. In looking at the data, and that's what we're here to do today, we really need to look at the factors that contributed to these designations. So the CSI, school identification process, was such that at the first level, so what you'll see is they took a 3-stage approach to the identification process, and they start initially with every Title I elementary and middle school. So here we're using elementary and middle as an example. They have the same process for high school, and that also includes graduation rate. But just for simplicity, let's walk through the 3-stage process they undertook. So at the first level, we're starting with all Title I schools within the elementary and middle school grade band. And at stage 1, we are looking at content mastery achievement scores that were obtained in school year 2022. And what they're doing is they rank order every Title I school in the state of Georgia, and they look at the bottom 10%. That bottom 10% is what is selected in stage 1. As we progress to stage 2, it's important to note that in school year 22, only one indicator of the progress component was actually obtained, possible to measure. And that single indicator is all that is being used as stage 2. And that single indicator is the progress toward English language proficiency, which means the only subgroup taken into account for all of these schools at stage 2 are in fact our English learners. And that's a very important point to make, because that's a very small subgroup, very small subset of students that they're taking a look at stage 2, and then they're taking the lowest 3/4 of performance at that stage 2. As we move to the last stage, the last CCRPI indicator component that was used here was readiness. And here we are looking at the lowest 5% of the total. They go back to that total number of Title I schools, and they look at the lowest 5% performing in readiness. Only then do we have the final list of CSI federally designated schools that were provided by the state of Georgia in school year 2023. Please let me know if there are any questions. I just want everybody to be very clear on the process, and it's a different process than what we're used to because of the modified CCRPI.
Yeah,
Yes.
just want to make 100%
Of course.
certain. So if we're looking at like A.B. Williams, where it says that we have English learners comprising 1% of the school,
Right.
that means when Georgia was looking at these schools using CCRPI data, we're looking at 45.8 students were what judged the school to be in this category.
Exactly, at stage 2, and that's an excellent point to
Okay.
make. Yes,
That-
we're talking that
that-
small of a number of students
So if
accounted for that
if
designation.
5 of them are absent on the day that they take the test. Okay, thank you for,
Yes,
the
and that's why
water
it's
is no
so
longer
important to
muddy.
note that. Yes,
Yeah.
perfect. Yes,
So
ma'am.
That's a really fascinating way to put it. Thank you, Dr. Bringman. Because when you said that, I was like, oh, okay, so that's basically No Child Left Behind, just reconstituted, reformulated, and put in a different way. But that's really when you're making a categorization, and every child counts,
Yes.
every learner counts.
Yes.
But the categorization of the whole school by a small subset,
Yes.
it means that if we are successful in getting them what they need, then all boats are raised by the tide. Everybody does better, but you're being judged by the work that you're doing on the ones that are struggling the most. And that sounds like Dr. Watt's passion area, so I'm glad that we have a way to address that.
And let me correct my math, because if we're looking at 1% of 458, that's actually 4.5 students.
Yes.
I was looking at another school that was at 9%, so it's actually,
Yes.
we're waking up. So that's only not even 5 students that
right.
are looked at to score A.B. Williams as a CSI.
Yeah,
Now,
it's
granted,
that
I
lowest
understand there are other
three-quarter
things that need to be
yes.
worked on,
Yeah.
but for it to get this designation, it was based on 5 students. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so is it a combination of these three?
At each stage, that's an excellent question,
Okay.
sir. At each stage, they identify a subset of that initial pool of all Title I schools that fell within elementary and middle grade bands.
So that if they're in the lowest 10% on content mastery.
Yes,
And the lowest 5% on readiness,
yes,
that also contributes to that.
Yes, sir.
So it's not just that you have the lowest 3/4 in progress toward English.
well, it's all three taken
All three.
together, and at that staged level, what that means is, I understand that stage 3 may introduce a question because they go back to the total number, but what they're doing is, so that stage 1, you'll have that lowest 10%, so only 10, the other 90% are out of the equation. For those 10%, then they go to stage 2 and see which of those are in the lowest 3/4 in progress toward English language proficiency. And for just that now subset of schools, then they go back and see, are they also in the lowest 5% of the total Title I schools in readiness? So it's really that funnel effect,
Okay.
because they're trying to get it down to a very small, finite, workable number, because the state provides that comprehensive support and improvement. The state provides resources, staff, et cetera, to help the schools address whatever their areas of need are.
Okay, so if they were to improve the content mastery
Yes.
and the readiness, they would come off this list. Okay, that's what I need.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Hotchkiss Brown has a question.
Thank you. I didn't ask my question. CSI is comprehensive support and improvement and is directed toward the lowest 5% of Title I schools. CSI Tier 4 is the 10 lowest performing
Correct.
in the lowest 5%.
Yes.
So Tier 4 is the bottom performing
Yes.
of CSI. What does that look like in the numbers that Dr. Bringman just said, in context of how we translated it to real seats? What's the difference between CSI Tier 4 in terms of real seats?
Understood. So for Tier 4, we're still talking about, and that's where you'll have to forgive me, I do not know. We can go to Mercer and just see, but I don't have that exact number of English learners off the top of my head. So if we click here and quickly go to Mercer to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Sorry. And I should have just gone to.
English learners is 14%, bless you, for English, 14% English learners at Mercer.
So at Mercer, yes, so those English learners, 14% of the total enrollment, so 14% of 402. So we're
Okay.
talking
43,
roughly 56 students.
Okay.
And then, so what we're talking about are those 56 students that need that intensive, comprehensive support we need for them to improve.
Oh, okay. So thank you. Your answer answers a question that I was going to ask at the next meeting, and that is whether or not the CSI Tier 4 was, and the low growth were related to behavior, which is high, really, really high, or English language learners. I don't want to assume that it's the challenges of English language learners, but you're saying at Mercer that happens to be the case.
It does because it's the same process. They just happen to be in that very bottom tier.
Okay, thank you.
And that's how they have that Tier 4.
We're going to let you move ahead now because
Yeah.
it's already
ma'am.
10:20. But I do want to say I sure wish we'd had this information when Dr. Woods was here last week, because I'd like to ask him what was the thinking behind the decision to create this model. What brilliance brought this to pass. But
Well,
please
it
continue.
was, to be honest, it had to do with what components were available and what was a reasonable strategy to really target specific schools where you can identify pockets of students that really need that concentrated support, those additional support systems to be successful. We want all of our students to thrive. We want all of our students to achieve, but which ones really need particular attention, special attention?
All right, please continue.
And I apologize for switching back and forth. So what I'd like to do as we move into each of the Chevron reports is I would like to go over the first one in full detail to orient everyone to all of the data contained on the Chevron report. And then as we proceed to the next 5, we will really just hone in on the performance measures that are critical to evaluate. Does that sound fair to everybody? Perfect. So taking a look at A.B. Williams Elementary, and as I stated, we will have Dr. Foy here on the 24th to address the school. If you look in the top left corner, you will see the enrollment of the school, the general fund, and what that means with regard to funding for the school and funding per student. And that little schoolhouse tells you exactly where they're located. Off to the right is the student demographic information that has been deemed critical and typically identifies our various subgroups of particular attention to the Board Accountability Committee as well as the Equity Subcommittee are the mobility rates, the absenteeism, and of course behavior. So Dr. Hoskins-Brown, as you were indicating, those are things that we've always addressed. What does student attendance look like at each of those schools? Is behavior an issue? So when you look at the school's performance in that regard, we see there's a 31% mobility rate. Now keep in mind, that means kids moving in and out of the school throughout the entire academic year. And it is possible that a student may have come in and out of that school a couple of times and double count. That is a real possibility within that mobility rate. With regard to students absent less than 10% of the days, and that is consistent with the way state reports, we see 70% of the students were absent, not as much as would be anticipated, were attending as you would expect. 30%, though, of course, are those absentee students that may need special attention. Behavior, the weighted suspension rate was a 15.91, and you can see what the average is for all elementary schools within the district. That is off to the right. So that is quite a bit higher than the elementary school average. You'll see that mobility also is higher. The next bit of data is typically where we report on staff vacancies, turnover, experience levels. Unfortunately, that data is still pending because of transitions in systems. We're unable to compute that data at this time. The racial and ethnic demographic makeup is on there following. And typically off to the left of that, we provide school climate data. School climate data was unavailable due to the lack of computation of that since school year of 2019 due to pandemic-related suspension of various indicators. As we progress, we get to the first significant performance indicator, and that is GMAS achievement and growth. And I'd like to orient everybody on how to interpret this data. The first thing I will note is when you're looking at the bubbles, because everybody's eyes go central immediately, the dark circle, the dark bubble represents the district. The lighter green circle indicates the school. As this is presented on a y-axis, the x-axis, of course, runs horizontally across the bottom, and that is a reflection of median student growth per GMAS, as well as on the vertical y-axis, also GMAS-related data, and this is the actual content mastery weighted performance. So when we talk about achievement, we're talking about that weighted performance. And just to keep in mind, what that means is that we utilize the Godot formula depending upon what level our students score at. There are 4 performance levels. For the beginning, that beginner level, there is a 0 weight. For the developing students, our next weight up is a 0.5. So we get 50% credit for that. As we move to those who are proficient, that is our full 1.0, right? 100% of that is computed into the score. And then we look at the top performing students. Those are the distinguished level of performance, and we get 1.5 weight, so 150% of that is computed into that total achievement score. So as you look at the orientation, it's important to note that the top left, so if you'll just divide this in your mind into quadrants, and that's what we've tried to do for you, the top left indicates very high achievement, but low growth. So even though it sounds good, the growth is not where it should be. It's low. On the bottom left hand, we have low achievement, low growth. What I'd like for you to note is that when we're looking below the 50th percentile for median growth, so when you're looking at the left-hand side, the entire left-hand side of the graph, that is not really an ideal area for any of our students to be in because they are not growing. They're not developing at the rate that we want them to develop. So the right side is really the most significant. That's where we're hoping to see most of our bubbles, right? Both for the district and definitely for the schools as well. The top right-hand corner, the top right-hand quadrant is the high achievement, high growth, the ideal. And then the bottom is low achievement but high growth. So students are growing beyond that 50% expectation level, but they're not quite achieving at that level that we would ideally like. So let's take a look at ELA performance, and please note this is the total English language arts performance. So we are not talking about reading on grade level here. We're talking about both reading and vocabulary as well as their ability to write. That's critical. That language and written component is also taken into account. So with regard to ELA, what we see is that the school is in fact growing their students, their performance in school year 23. So last year's performance, what does it look like? They're growing. Are they achieving quite to where we would want them to be? No, they're still below that 50th percentile for achievement, right? But with regard to growth, they are exceeding. Math is somewhat comparable, but a little different in that there's some growth, but it's not as high as what we see in ELA. So definitely room for improvement with regard to math performance. Any questions before I move to the second page? Yes, sir.
So, in these numbers,
Yes.
and thank you for the explanation,
You're welcome.
so developing is included.
Yes.
The question is, if the goal is proficiency, why are we even including develop? Because developing is below proficient.
That's an excellent question, sir, and we have to because that is how the state computes that weighted achievement. That weighted achievement
Got it.
takes into account all four levels.
Dr.
But
Hosky- oh.
I do think it's important to note that we only get 50% credit for the developing. We don't get that full 100% of their score. We only get 50% of their score that counts in. And obviously for beginners, we get zero. Yes, sir.
Dr. Hosky Brown.
Thank you. I won't comment long, but I just want to point out this is my favorite part of the report. This is the part of the report that we spent the greatest amount of time trying to develop because we knew that scores didn't give us the whole story, but if we
Correct.
were looking at growth,
Yes.
that we would know where our work was maturing. So I just really, really appreciate the effort that goes into this, and I understand that you say that
Thank you.
we need to be in quadrat 2. You're welcome. We need to be in quadrat 2, and that is our continued goal.
Yes.
My thought about your question, Mr. Moss, and I'm wondering if I understand this correctly, Dr. May, Dr. Watts, is that if we did not consider developing, wouldn't we have an inflated view of our growth because we would not be considering movement of those who were underprepared?
Yes, absolutely. Plus, I mean, the very nature of growth encompasses developing. The very nature of what they're doing when they're developing, they're growing in their ability to master skills. They haven't quite reached proficiency, but they're ever growing.
So it's like cheating on my Weight Watchers app. Like if I only start after I've already lost
Yes.
5 pounds and not at the weight that I really, really started at?
Yes.
Okay.
We have to include all,
you.
and of course, you see for the beginners, we get zero. I mean, they're still taking the test, but we get zero credit.
Dr. May, is there some reason that speech is not included, a child's ability to speak? Because as far as I'm concerned, that's a real impediment to success, if you're not able to articulate your thoughts.
So the way it's not captured directly as in spoken language, but language is absolutely included in that second half, rough half, if you will, of the ELA total score, because your ability to articulate has to do with responding to those open-ended prompts. So they are getting a sense of how students communicate in written format as opposed to verbal. So it's supposed to map on to full language ability, but from a written standpoint.
If I were to ask one of our curriculum specialists, how do we make sure our children are learning to speak? What might that answer be, do you think? How would I know going into a classroom that children are getting practice, you know?
May I defer to Mrs. Burkett, who may be able
Oh,
to
good. Okay.
best address that.
Good morning, everyone. So that will come in many forms. A lot of classroom discussion about what have I read, what am I learning today. We have teachers that are implementing learning intentions and looking at success criteria, so students are constantly saying, this is what I'm learning today, and this is how I'm going to know when I've learned it. So getting them engaged in the academic vocabulary. Honestly, whoever's doing the thinking is doing the working, whoever's doing the talking is doing the learning. So trying to get our teachers to engage in that conversation and that aspect as they move through all of the different topics each day.
So, Ms. Burkett.
Can I add
the
to that?
silent-
Can
oh,
I just
okay.
add to that? But in order to actually measure it, we would have to have rubrics in place. So it would be very objective based on just what a teacher is hearing and seeing, hearing in the student verbal participation in class. But in order to actually measure whether our students are proficient in speaking, you would have to have rubrics and more formal opportunity. And I mean, that could be existing at the district, in the district somewhere, but there's not like a
Yeah.
wholesale opportunity to do that.
And Ms. Burkett, are our teachers actually attuned to that as a necessary part of their instructional toolbox, that their children need to be able to recite and all the things that might encourage verbal proficiency?
For the most part, yes, ma'am, but that is a continuing work in progress as we focus on literacy, that literacy is reading, writing, but it's also speaking and listening.
Yes.
And so focusing on the skills that help students bridge the gap between being able to read to being able to write, and then what does that look like when I'm speaking, and then how am I a good listener? So I think a lot of our work that we've done has gotten them to the beginning stages of that. But depending on where you are in your education career, you might have a little more work to do as opposed to those who have a little more experience. And that's what part of our literacy work and literacy training will help to improve, is that speaking and listening side.
Well, thanks. Board members, I'd love for you to do an experiment and just the children in your lives, engage them in conversation and see what you get. Do you get a back and forth conversing, or do you get yes, no, you know? And I'm not talking about mood. I'm not talking about mood, but actual capacity to carry on a conversation. Yes, Dr. Howard Hall.
I'd just like to say that this is also important for teachers to have the proper training on RTI, the RTI process, the response to intervention, which will give them the ability to determine whether or not their student is struggling in any area when it comes to language arts, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, all of those, as well as speaking, which that's important for the RTI process for our teachers to have the proper training on, and teachers in that building that can assist with that, our academic coaches, to assist with the RTI process to determine if there are any problems in those areas.
Let me let you continue. Sorry for all the interruptions.
We are still using Amira,
Yes,
correct?
Yes, and that address.
Yeah, okay. Amira, you need to hop on Amira with
Yes.
a student, because it listens to them and sometimes drives them nuts because they might have a Southern accent. But it'll help the student continue to say the word at a younger age, tell them how many words they're getting in a minute. So I really think, I heard a lot of reading during the pandemic at my house to Amira. She might have, I don't know, he or she or they were called names sometimes by my son.
So that addresses that fluency component.
And see, Dr. May, that's a cultural thing, because I'm sure anyone who lives with Mr. Brinkman, you're going to speak, and you're going to speak a lot any chance you get, So it is a cultural thing also, and
Yes.
something, again,
Of
with
course.
the inequities, we have to talk about what our students being, have access to
Absolutely.
develop their speaking capacity.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as we move to the second page of the Chevron report, what we will see is the CCRPI performance. We are not going to dwell on this because of the limited data that we have had for school year 22. But it's important to note that the reason why this is incorporated into all of our Chevron reports is because it aligns with the fact that the district is a strategic waiver school system, and performance on the CCRPI and that second look, the beating the odds, also based on CCRPI computations, play a role in performance. Those CSI, TSI designations also are taken into account for the district performance with regard to the contract requirements. When we go back to looking at the progress made last year by the students at A.B. Williams, it's important to look at their iReady data. Remember, iReady is the formative assessment. And here I bring your attention to the growth occurring between the beginning of year versus the end of year. So BOY stands for beginning of year data, performance levels. End of year is designated by EOY. And what we see on the bottom is how much growth, that median progress toward 100% of the typical growth was obtained by grades 1 through 5. And what we see is for reading, grades 2 through 5 exceeded that 100% growth by the end of the academic year, whereas for math, it was only grade 5 that exceeded that 100%. So the work to be done appears to be grade 1 reading, and then for math, grades 1 through 4. And then lastly, what we do is take another look at GMAS performance and specifically honing in on reading on grade level, given the fact that literacy is the North Star of the district and the importance nationally. It's important to look at grades 3, 4, and 5. Remember, that is the tested grade band for GMAS. And when we look at performance levels, we see growth. Significant growth that has occurred for all 3 grade levels when we compare GMAS scores from school year 22 versus last year, school year 23. Any questions? Yes, Dr. Hoskins?
Go on.
That's all right. Just a comment. I'm just really want to give kudos to the Williams team. People may or may not remember, but prior to A.B. Williams being changed to A.B. Williams and being Spencer Elementary School, it was the first turnaround school in our district under No Child Left Behind. And it was an arduous experience for everyone involved. But the hallmark that former Principal Williams developed in that school, besides just her really friendly, joyous spirit and loving interaction with the kids, was the fact that they figured out how to get the young people where they needed to be after that turnaround. And so this kind of student attention and content recovery that you're seeing from the end of year, from the beginning of year to end of year, is kind of the hallmark of that school. And so I really applaud them of doing that. I'll say it again when they come next time, but I think people don't remember that history, that this is the school that figured out how to do it in our district first. And even though they've hit some recent challenges, they're figuring it out again, and I'm really proud of them.
Thank you.
David?
Do we have a grade 1 assessment that tells us what level they're at? Just to know, like at grade 1, we already know they're 2 grades behind? They've just entered, but they're 2 grades behind, so they're starting at a -2, and we're trying by 3rd grade to get them.
Well, these kids are coming, most of them are coming from the Formy Early Childhood Center,
Some of them are.
which we have, pre-K and K there.
Yes.
So
Well, yeah,
perhaps-
and if we had and do we have like a line in the sand or a data point at 1st grade for?
Beyond iReady, is there, Mrs. Burkett, would you like to address that?
Sure. And since you brought up Amira previously,
Yes.
we do have that for our through 3 students. There is several different norm reference data points that are in there that will let us know based off of oral reading fluency, overall performance, vocabulary, sight recognition, et cetera. We have that in percentile rankings as well as an ARM score that tells us where grade level is and then how many months ahead or behind or close to grade level a student actually is, and how close they are to moving from the 25th percentile or below to the 50th to the 75th, et cetera.
Thank you. Yeah, that would just be interesting to, and I hate to make people dig up more data, but it would be interesting to know where the intervention, and definitely for Dr. Watts leading the team, to know where the intervention needs to be if we are, because we're going to have a subsection of people that are at FORMI coming in and a subsection that aren't in any of our schools coming in. And is there a statistical difference? Are we actually doing something at FORMI and those students coming in aren't behind or aren't as behind as much? And does the intervention need to actually happen at pre-KK and then continue versus us just jumping in at first grade going, oh my gosh, they're already so far behind. Again, and this would support the Reverend's push for let's get more pre-Ks if we can show that, yeah, maybe they don't have as many people at home reading to them, but if we've got them at school reading more, they're starting off when they get to first grade in a better place.
And I'll just add that I was at A.D. Williams yesterday, in fact, and the principal and I were talking about this very subject of students coming in from FORMI. And what was enlightening about that conversation is the budding partnership that those 2 schools are starting to have, so that there's some vertical articulation as students transition from FORMI, and that teachers at FORMI understand what first grade expectations look like, so that when those students can be adequately prepared at the early childhood level. So that is an emerging partnership that I think we need to continue to foster.
Ms.
That's
May,
great.
it
Can
might
I-
be good to have Ms. Foster from FORMI here for when Dr. Foy gives his report. I also want to say that it would certainly help us if Georgia got away from the rule that you don't even have to come to school until you're 6.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
already puts us
Behind
at such a disadvantage. Ms. Grabowski had a remark, and then Dr. Howard Hall.
I had my hand up for a while, Miss.
Oh, and then Pastor Smith.
Okay.
Just connecting all those dots, and we've talked for years about the importance of pre-K and kindergarten.
Yes.
If taking that model and looking at which students have attended pre-KK
have.
across all of our schools, and then taking that a step further and integrating that into our advocacy with our local legislators so that we can provide them the data
Yes.
that points to the importance of mandatory kindergarten and hopefully mandatory pre-K at some point.
And of course, we do provide that data in the pre-K and kindergarten report, where we compare students who were with us in pre-K and what their performance looks like on G-Kids at the end of the year versus those kids who just came into kindergarten but were not with us for pre-K. So we do present that comparison.
Okay, is it possible to receive that report again?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Howard Hall.
Yes, Title I schools designation and status is associated with a budget. We know that before with the No Child Left Behind, they were identified as turnaround schools needing, and they've received a SIG, a School Improvement Grant. So we know that these schools will also receive additional
Yes.
funding for
Yes.
Title I if they're designated as TSI or CSI.
Correct.
So it'd be great if we had our Title I director to participate with the cabinet during the times when we are discussing Title I schools, because this is based on all the Title I schools in Georgia. And also, when our principals do come, I would like for them to share with us how they are allocating those funds and to show us what do they plan to do with those funds to show growth and improvement, because they receive
Yes.
a huge amount of funding for being in these designations. So
Correct.
being in these designations comes with a budget.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for bringing that up.
Pastor?
Thank you for this report. Ms. Connie Hall said that many of the students come from forming. You said that some of the students come from forming. I would like to ask, I know you don't have the exact numbers maybe, but would you say a high percentage or a low percentage of the students come from forming?
We can provide that data.
Okay.
I would prefer to be precise
Yes,
than
ma'am.
speculate, so we're happy to look at that and provide the exact data for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
The thing I'd like to ask board members to think about is what of these, look at student information, what could we most impact most quickly? And this 70% absentee rate,
That is 70% who are present, so it's the exact
Oh,
opposite. It's
okay.
only a 30%
30%,
who
okay. All
exceed
right.
that 10 days.
Okay,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
even that,
Yes.
even that, what a difference that could make if we could get our kids to be in school.
Yes.
What might we do to really make an impact on that one factor that would change probably the whole trajectory of all of this? So I just like us to, I love for us to do the philosophizing and the talk, but I always want to think about what some action is. So
Correct.
I'd like us to think about what might we do to encourage higher attendance. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
looking, and I know we aren't probably going to get through all the schools, but we've had the data, we've looked at it. One of the things that kind of jumped out to me is that our students are comfortable with iReady. They're showing a ton of growth there, and I know there is some carryover from iReady to GMAS, but I feel like are our students as comfortable when they sit down in front of the GMAS, or is there the high stakes stress? And iReady is kind of like they totally forget it's an assessment because it's almost like it's there all the time, so they get used to it. And where the disconnect is on a lot of these schools showing great growth in iReady, but then not as much growth in GMAS, and how it would be again, finding the golden ticket. How do we help our students that are growing demonstrate that same growth on the state standard? And I don't know if iReady can help us with that transition. Oh, she's like, I have that answer.
I think that's an excellent question, and I think this is the opportunity of a lifetime for parents to make a significant impact on the achievement of each of their students, and that is that everybody can log on to Experience Georgia online and take a simulation of the GMAS. It allows for practice, and this is for all tested grade levels, and students can log on, they can see the types of questions, they can manipulate. We talked about those manipulatives that they have, so they can see how to measure with a ruler, they can see how to type, how to move various objects, rotate them accordingly, so they can get practice within that DRC Beacon platform, and that is available on experiencegeorgiaonline.com.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Moss,
Go
and
ahead.
then.
No, let her go, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It won't take long. It would be interesting to know the percentage of students at Forman who are in pre-K that remain there, because many of those students, they transfer to their zone schools once they enroll in kindergarten, or they may transfer into a choice program. So it'd be interesting to see that data to find out how do they maintain their, remain there
Right.
from pre-K all the way through first,
Okay.
as opposed to K and first.
Mr. Feliciano, your work is cut out for you every time somebody opens their mouth.
We are happy to follow up and provide additional data.
Mr. Moss, and then.
Okay, so, and thank you, Mr. Brigham, Dr. Brigham, rather. So iReady, the transfer from iReady to GMAS would only be on Lexile scores, right? It would not be ELA.
Correct, yes. Only
Okay, so
reading
that's, I
is
think that's
encompassed.
where the
Yes.
disconnect is. You know what, and I didn't know about what we were just talking about, which is great, which I'm excited that our communications department is going to let every parent know. I think that could demystify, if the parents are getting with their kids and it's almost a game. So, yeah.
There are all sorts of parental resources broken down by grade levels, so you can see the type of content in addition to that. So definitely making those resources available is critical. All right.
I'm very happy we brought up the whole parental involvement piece, because one of the things that I appreciate hearing from Dr. Watts, and I'm hoping at our town hall that she will speak about it more, is that our idea of parental involvement, running up to the school with cupcakes and being, almost to the point where the principal is saying, oh, you won't be able to come tomorrow, okay? That parental involvement can take place 99% at home.
Yep.
But what are the things that a parent needs to know to do at home that will make their parental involvement very evident in the
Right.
experience of their child? So that's a big piece we have to look forward to. Okay, and I'm going to let you finish up now, and then we'll have final remarks from
So I know we just
Dr.
have a
Watts.
couple of
We have
minutes. Do you
5
want to
minutes.
try to run through just real quickly, just to take a quick snapshot of GMAS performance of these additional schools? Yes, ma'am. So taking a look at Brock Elementary, what you'll see, I really want you to take a good look at their math growth because it's phenomenal. So when you're looking at the fact that achievement is getting closer to where we want them to be, right? Very close to the middle, but that growth is really exceptional, and that is mirrored with their iReady. So excellent work at Brock Elementary. They made significant gains across all grade levels. So you see kindergarten through 5th grade, they're all exceeding, and some are exceeding levels beyond the typical growth. So very impressive growth for Brock. Duren Middle. Duren continues to have some challenges with regard to performance. So what we see is they are still below the district with regard to both achievement and growth. So taking a look at what 2023 looked like from a formative assessment standpoint, you can see tremendous reading growth in grade 7 and grade 8, but 6th grade seems to be an area of challenge for Duren Middle, as is also the case for math. So there's something happening with that transition into 6th grade for the folks at Duren. Largo Tibet, what we see are some slight differences with regard to ELA performance is less than math performance. They're really coming along well in math. So taking a look at their iReady data across 2023, what you can see are really just a little bit of challenge, perhaps. The 98% is pretty good. For kindergarten, so reading across the board, they're doing well. Math, there are areas of opportunity for growth in grades 2, 4, and 5. As we move to Mercer Middle, it's a similar story with regard to the middle schools. So what we're seeing is that lagging performance in both ELA and math, and that is corresponding with lagging growth. So that's where the area of concern is. And when we look at Mercer in particular, look at grades 6 and 8 for reading. They're in the 50th range, and we're expecting 100% by, right? So math, similar story for grades 6 and 8. So those are their challenge grade levels and their challenge areas, both reading and math. And lastly, Windsor Forest Elementary, and what we see is lagging performance and growth in ELA, but really tremendous progress in math. Look at where they are math-wise. That's impressive because they're making gains in both achievement and growth. And we can see that somewhat mirrored by the iReady results. To be honest, I was a little surprised to see math in grades 2 and 3 seems to be a challenge, a little bit of leftover for grade 4. With regard to reading, it's grades 1 through 3 that really need particular attention. So I know that was very quick, but I wanted to have you hone in on where we've made great progress, great growth and gains, and where there are still areas of opportunity. And thank you very much.
May I ask one quick question? When we look at the report that's
Yes.
pending as far as staffing is concerned, what do you think that will show us?
What we have seen in the past is that schools with higher turnover tend to have lower performance.
Gotcha.
So we need that consistency in educators,
Gotcha.
in teachers who are there, who care. Students are looking for that teacher to be their one constant, even if their day-to-day is not as predictable.
Gotcha.
Board members, that can go back to budget,
Exactly. Exactly.
incentives.
Yes.
Ms. Grabowski has a question.
Just quickly.
Yes.
Can I assume correctly that the orange is not in your legend? So does that mean 3 or more grade levels behind?
Oh, I apologize. That orange is supposed to be the pink. It reformatted, so
okay.
I apologize.
Okay.
So with that one, we're following, it's falling below that 70th percent. So it's
Okay.
really, it's meant to capture that idea that these students are really not
Yeah.
even hitting
That.
that average,
Okay.
70% being equivalent to a C, if you will,
Right.
from a grade perspective. They're not even hitting that.
Okay, and then
Yes.
just quickly, I wanted to echo Mr. Moss's comment to our communications team about the GMAS testing and to
Yes.
clarify that the web address is gaexperienceonline.com.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Ms. May, Dr. May, what correlations can we make, though, with these feeder schools? If the Wren is suffering at 6th grade, then what was happening with those 5th graders at Hodge? You know, things don't just happen.
You're
So
right.
I guess we need to see a really a linear.
We would have to see
review.
where those kids were in 5th grade. Were they in fact within the district? How many were out of the district? So who is that population of students who's coming into 6th grade? And what is perhaps unique? And when we can address those unique factors, that's when we can really target improvement strategies.
Yeah, the same with Mercer. You
Yes.
know, what's the look of those rising 6th graders?
Right.
coming
And that
in?
is something that if you'd like for us to look at the composition of those 6th graders for both of those schools, we can do a custom report and take a look at that and provide you with that data.
So in closing, what do you see for us on the 24th of October? What do you plan to cover?
On the 24th, we will have principals who can talk about the challenges that they faced entering 2023 and what strategies, action items were implemented to yield the growth gains that we saw, the achievement gains that we saw, and where were some areas where further work is needed. So that's what all of you can anticipate to hear, is what are those continuing areas of improvement and what are those areas of success, those celebrations, and what can we do moving forward. I know they're always welcoming of your comments, your thoughts, and always your support and encouragement.
Okay. I'd like to take an inner poll and see how many board members would agree to coming at 10 a.m., maybe not every month, but every other month, to have this meeting, as opposed to 3:30 on a Tuesday where so much is going on. So I'll get back with you after I
Yes, ma'am.
get a poll from them, okay? But
Yes,
thank
ma'am.
you, and we'll see you on the 24th.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Watts, did you have anything you wanted to say before we adjourn?
The only thing that I'll add that we'll make sure that the principals do in the October report is to talk about where their Title I money is going.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
To Ms. Howard Hall's point, and I'll also say that as a part of my transition into the district, West Ed will be doing a deeper dive study into these 6 schools, talking to parents, talking to students, talking to teacher focus groups,
Yes.
talking to teacher focus groups, parents focus groups, and student focus groups, observing classes. I am always of the mindset that data never lies, but it doesn't tell the whole truth either. And it's important for us to get those perspectives to give us an even more a clearer indication of what these schools are doing and where potential gaps exist. So just know that that is a part of my listening and learn entry, and it will be how I chart the path forward in terms of strategies that impact this data. I need the quantitative and the qualitative data to know how to chart the path forward.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, staff, thank you. Mr. Feliciano?
Yes, there's one more item on the agenda that I would like to address is the November 28th meeting. We have a conflict on that date. I would like to recommend December 6th, which is a Wednesday, the board meeting. We can do it at 10 o'clock, same thing. We will be
that's
covering
great.
on the agenda the strategic plan update.
Okay, well, that fits right into my hopes that I can get consensus on that change.
A torpedo on my birthday, I just want y'all to know.
Oh, okay. Well,
I want a cupcake.
yeah, we'll definitely bring cupcakes.
Here.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Feliciano. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Staff, thank you for being here early today. I really appreciate it. And Ms. Burkett, we certainly like having you here. That expertise is a big help to be able to refer to.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And everyone, please remember about inequity, what can happen if we can make it go away, just what could happen in the lives of our students. So thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.